Have you seen these things called fat quarters in the fabric store and you're wondering what exactly they are? I mean, if there's a fat quarter, is there a skinny quarter? And sometimes they're 18 by 20 inches and sometimes they're 18 by 22 inches. And what's with that? Well, let me give you the skinny on fat quarters. Let's start with how fabric is manufactured. You probably know that it's woven, and if you've seen any videos of fabric factories, then it's put on big rollers and put through the printing process and everything like that. For this tutorial, there are two things you need to know. Number one, on these two long edges of the fabric, these edges are finished, and these edges are also called the selvage edges. They're finished because these edges get a lot of wear as they're going through the machinery. The ends don't get so much wear because they're such long lengths, but these edges, as they're going through the machinery, get lots of wear, so they finish them. They're very tightly woven like this so that they don't ravel as they're going through the machines. So this is called the selvage edge, and they're on the two long lengths here. The second thing you need to know is this is the width of fabric. It's often abbreviated as WOF, the width of fabric. And this width of fabric can vary. It's usually about 40 to 44 inches in most fabric that you buy in the store, but I've seen 32, there's all the way to 108 inches. So just remember that this is the width of fabric and it can vary, and even in quilting fabric, it varies between 40 and 44 inches. So that's two things, the selvage edges and the width of the fabric. When the fabric's ready to go to the store, they take lengths of the fabric, usually about 8 yards, and they fold them in half, just like that. So the two selvage edges are together on one side and there's a fold on the other side, and they put it on a bolt. They just roll it onto a bolt like this. And now this looks very familiar to what you might see in the store. This looks just like a bolt of fabric, and that's what you see in the store. Fabric is usually sold off the bolt by the yard. So you've decided you want some of this fabric, you take it to the cutting counter, they unroll it, and you tell them you want a yard or a half a yard or a quarter of a yard, and they measure along here the number of inches. So if you said you want a yard, that's 36 inches, they'd measure 36 inches across and cut it like this, and you'd get a yard of fabric. Now that yard of fabric is going to measure this 36 inches across, and then the width of the fabric the other way, right? From the selvage to the selvage, which is the width of the fabric that we discussed before. So it's not going to be a perfect square. It's going to be 36 inches by whatever the width of the fabric is. Now, what does that have to do with fat quarters? Because we were talking about fat quarters and I've just been talking about getting fabric. So let's go back to fat quarters. When you go and ask for a quarter of a yard here, off the bolt, they would measure 9 inches because that's a quarter of a whole yard. 36 divided by 4 is 9 inches. They would measure 9 inches here and cut a piece of fabric. So this isn't quite to scale, but we'll say this is a quarter of a yard, it's 9 inches. And so you would get a piece that's 9 inches wide, and then the width of fabric this way. So this is a skinny quarter. So why do we even need fat quarters? And that's because this shape of fabric is not really useful for quilters. This long skinny piece is not as useful for cutting the shapes that quilters like to cut. They would rather have a square piece of fabric. So these things called fat quarters were invented. So let's talk about how fat quarters are made. So fat quarters are made by cutting a whole yard of fabric off. So we're going to pretend this is our yard of fabric. We've cut it off of the bolt. And then we're going to open that up and we're going to cut it into 4 equal pieces, into quarters, by dividing it in half this way. So you're still getting a quarter of a yard, but it's a completely different shape. Each fat quarter should be 18 inches wide because this whole piece of fabric is a yard, 36 inches wide, and half of that is 18 inches, right? But then the width of the fabric may vary, right? So this half could be anywhere from 20 to 22 inches if the width of the fabric is 40 to 44 inches. So that's why fat quarters can be different sizes in one direction. They should be the same size in this direction, the 18-inch way, but in this direction, they could be different depending on the width of the fabric that they started with. I'll compare. You can see that this is a fat quarter. Here's a fat quarter, and here's the original quarter, the skinny quarter. And they are two completely different sizes. You can see that this might be more useful for cutting shapes out of than this. So that's the deal with a fat quarter, and that's a fat quarter, and that's a skinny quarter, and that's why they're different sizes. I hope that helps.